How will you manage an exodus of expertise as the UK leaves Europe?
So now we're going to examine how I might take account of other supply attrition drivers. So in this case, we may be looking at potentially employees leaving to return to countries within the EU as a result of EU exit, or any other driver that may be affecting supply as well. So what I'm looking at is my current supply within my intensive care unit. Obviously, this could be higher up than that, so I could look across, for example, the whole hospital that the intensive care sits in, or indeed across a region, a trust, nationally, however I choose to plan that, or I could take it more granularly if I wanted to. This could be individual shifts I wanted to manage and supply against. So what I'm seeing is what my current staffing level is for the individual jobs, so my clinical technicians, my nurses, my nursing managers, my coordinators, etc. And I can see what my current supply is. This is information which has probably come from my HR system, although I could have imported it from another place. And what I'm examining in this case is looking at attrition drivers that are job-based. We looked on a previous video at age-based attrition drivers, and I can combine the two, but for the purposes of simplicity, I'm looking at a job-based attrition in this case. So what I can go and do is look at what my attrition rates are and what they're predicted to be by my individual jobs. Very interesting where this information could be coming from. So clearly, if I have starters and leavers information from my HR system, I can calculate and interpolate this information and predict based on what my current attrition rates are, and that's a very good starting place. It might be, however, that as I've done in this model, I'm seeing an attrition rate which I understand to be at a certain level from my HR system. I'm predicting for certain jobs a peak in attrition through FY21 and into 2022, with that then tailing off as we move forward. So for example, some of my job roles, I'm seeing that I'm predicting that I'm going to get almost no attrition above and beyond the normal 5% turnover, in this case on my nursing director. However, on my clinical technician, I can see that I'm running typically at around 8%. I'm predicting a peak of attrition next year, with that tailing off and returning back to normal within a few years. But clearly, I've got to account for this peak in turnover as it occurs in there. And I can try different models on here. I've got a set of database tools that I can use on here to spread this information. I can plot this to a set of data from Office of National Statistics. I can plot it from research information from a university. I can plot it to any predicted supply information that I'd like. And clearly I've also done this year on year for simplicity, but you could do this quarter on quarter, you could do this month on month if you had that data at that level of granularity. And I have a number of versions that I could work on this. So I'm looking at my working version where I'm predicting potentially this worst case of peak here. I may put another version together and say, well, actually, what would happen if there was no peak in attrition? What would happen if it was a smaller peak? What would happen if it was a larger peak? And predict against those as we went forward. So what that then gives me is a view then of what my supply full-time equivalency is going to look like as we go forward for my individual job roles. So I'm taking account still of my retirement factors as we did in the age-based one, but also I'm now starting to see that I've got turnover predicted in the red, obviously being a decline, and then seeing what my total supply amount is going to be for each of the job roles, again within my intensive care unit. If I was looking wider, I would be seeing my recruiting staff, my HR staff, my payroll staff, my IT staff, my other clinical roles. That obviously then reflects out into the head count, and I can see which of those heads we're predicting are most likely to be leaving. So one of the extra data items I may import here, for example, is the nationality of the employee, and I might say that I have a different attrition rate for different nationalities. That may be another way to work that through. What that gives me, however, is a predicted information on what my supply looks like. This clearly is based on doing no recruiting. This is just from today what I've got and how is that going to be decayed. And that's reflected obviously in the compensation information. If we know what the rough on costs are for each of these roles, I can predict what the forward based on cost is. And for example, we get a nice view here that my clinical technician cost is going to tail away very rapidly, in spite of the fact that salaries may be rising. This is clearly because I'm losing staff rather than, which is offsetting any rise in that. Again, as I was doing recruitment, as I was bringing people in, that would change over time. So how does that then reflect through? So I've got a new update of my supply information. If I go and look at my gap analysis, what I can start to see potentially is looking at my supply and my demand, that I've still got a decline in supply. I may be predicting a peak, but actually as it transpires, the peak that I've predicted just in the one small unit hasn't made a great deal of effect. But I have a decaying supply, and I can plan based on that to look at the delta between my supply and demand and work out where I need to focus my recruiting activities, where I need to focus my learning activities, where I may need to transfer staff from one unit to another.
Start planning tomorrow's workforce today and see results.